You're listening to the Valleys to Victory podcast with Jeremy Greening, helping you move from stuck to forward in life's hardest seasons. Have you ever looked at your life and thought, why can't I handle this better? I mean, maybe you're still going to work, you're still caring for your family, you're still answering messages, and you're still showing up, and you're still doing what needs to be done, but inside, everything feels heavier than it should. You're tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. You're distracted, you're withdrawing. You're just withdrawing just a little from people you used to make time for. And small decisions, like what to cook, what to reply to a certain message, what to wear, it all feels enormous. And things you once handled without a second thought now feel almost impossible. And because you don't understand what's happening, you start blaming yourself. You start thinking things like, I should be stronger. I should be over this by now. What's wrong with me? I want to offer you a different possibility today, one that I think could change how you see the last few months, perhaps even years of your life. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're overwhelmed. Welcome to the Valleys to Victory podcast, and I'm Jeremy, and I'm really glad that you're here. Broken and overwhelmed are two very different things. And today I want to slow down and unpack the difference because I think a lot of us have been living as though we're broken, when really we're just carrying more than any one person was built to carry alone. I remember a season in my own life where this was exactly my story. From the outside, nothing looked dramatic. I wasn't in crisis. I was still turning up. I was still getting things done. But inside, I felt like I was operating at about 30% while trying to perform at 100. And instead of asking what was actually going on underneath the surface, I just kept telling myself to push harder, be strong, press in, toughen up, to stop being so sensitive about it. Don't be a sook. It took me a long time to realize that the problem was never my character. The problem was that I was carrying far more than I ever let myself admit, and nobody, including me, can carry an unlimited amount of weight without it showing up somewhere. So let's start here. Difficult seasons don't just affect your circumstances, they affect you internally in ways that are easy to miss because it happens really slowly. A hard season can affect your thinking. It can affect your energy, your confidence, even your motivation, your relationships, your sleep, your decision making, even your sense of who you are. Here's the key idea I want you to hold on to. Emotional overwhelm reduces your capacity. Not your worth, not your character, your capacity. Let me give you a picture that might help. Think about your phone. You've got 20 apps running in the background. In my case, maybe closer to 100. Maybe you're not even using most of them and you're not looking at them and you forget they're even open, but they're still there, quietly draining the battery in the background. They're still consuming power even while the screen shows you something else entirely. See, grief works just like that, as does fear. Conflict, uncertainty, unresolved pain, they all run in the background of your life, even when you're focused on something else. You might be sitting in a meeting, functioning perfectly well on the surface, while underneath there are a dozen open tabs draining your energy. A conversation that perhaps you're dreading, a diagnosis that you haven't processed yet, a relationship that ended badly, a version of yourself you feel like you've lost. And here's what I really want you to hear. This isn't laziness and it's not weakness. You may be trying to operate at full capacity while carrying more emotionally than anyone around you realizes. Maybe even more than you realize. So when you can't concentrate the way you used to, and when you find yourself snapping at people that you love, when getting out of bed feels like a small act of heroism for the day, that's not evidence that something is wrong with you as a person. That's evidence that your battery is being drained by things nobody else can see. And here's what makes it even trickier. The things draining your battery aren't always big. They aren't always obvious events. Sometimes it's one enormous thing, like a diagnosis or a divorce or a redundancy. But just as often, it's an accumulation of smaller things that nobody would flag as a crisis when looked at on their own. Things like financial pressure that's been quietly building for a couple of years. Maybe a parent who needs more care than they used to, or a job that technically hasn't changed, but somehow it feels heavier in the last month. See, none of those things on their own would necessarily overwhelm you, but stacked together, running in the background at the same time, they add up to something your capacity was never designed to hold indefinitely. I want to talk to you now about the hidden signs of overwhelm, because overwhelm often hides behind ordinary behavior. So it's worth naming what it actually looks like, because most people don't recognize it themselves until someone else describes it back to them and you realize you're in overwhelm. So overwhelm can look like procrastinating over the simplest tasks. The phone call you keep putting off, the form you keep meaning to fill in. It can look like becoming irritated more easily than usual. Snapping at your kids or snapping at your partner, your colleagues, snapping over things that wouldn't normally bother you. Yeah, it can look like forgetting things, walking into a room and not remembering why, or losing your keys 3 times in a week. It can look like feeling emotionally numb, going through the motions of your day without feeling really present in any of it. It can look like withdrawing from people, letting messages sit unanswered, and choosing to stay home instead of showing up. It can look like losing interest in things you used to enjoy, the hobby that used to light you up, and now it just feels like too much effort. It can look like feeling exhausted despite resting. You sleep 8 hours and wake up just as tired as when you went to bed. It can look like avoiding decisions altogether, because even small choices feel like too much. It can look like consistently scrolling, constantly distracting yourself, because sitting still means sitting with everything you've been avoiding. And it can sound like this: I just can't deal with that right now. Come on, who's had that thought before? None of these things I've mentioned by themselves mean something is seriously wrong. We all have off days. But when you notice several of them clustering together, sticking around for weeks on end rather than just days, that's usually your internal system telling you it's running low. And now you've suddenly become a worse person. Well, here's a line I want you to remember, and this is really important. Sometimes what looks like laziness from the outside is actually emotional exhaustion on the inside. Think back to what Jodie shared last episode. She talked about reaching a place where she wasn't laughing anymore. She wasn't eating properly. She didn't recognize herself in the mirror anymore. And here's the thing: Jodie is one of the most capable, competent people you'll ever meet. She was still functioning, she was still showing up, and she was still getting things done. But capability does not make anybody immune to overwhelm, friends. You can be highly competent and still be running on empty. And those two things are not contradictions. They can happen together more often than you think. In fact, I'd go further. The more capable you are, the better you tend to be at hiding it. Capable people are usually the ones who have had the most practice holding things together in public. So the signs get missed, not just by the people around them, but by themselves too. They get so good at it, they convince themselves that they are coping. And if you're someone who's always been the reliable one, the strong one, the one that others always lean on, I want you to hear this. None of that makes you exempt. It might just mean your overwhelm has been quieter and harder for anyone, including you, to spot. So I want you to stop using shame as a strategy. Here's something I've noticed in my own life and in the lives of people I've walked alongside. When we feel stuck, our instinct is often to become harder on ourselves. Come on, friends, we are our own worst critic. We think criticism will motivate us. We think if we're just tough enough on ourselves, we'll snap out of it. But shame doesn't produce movement. Shame produces paralysis. You cannot shame yourself into healing. You can't insult yourself into confidence. It's not how it works, friends. You can't punish yourself into becoming whole. And I want to say that again because I think it matters. Shame does not create the change you're looking for. It just adds another layer of weight on top of everything that you are already carrying. So instead of judgment, I want to invite you into curiosity. Curiosity asks better questions than shame does, and better questions tend to lead to somewhere much more useful. So instead of asking, what is wrong with me? Try asking, what have I been carrying? Instead of saying, why am I weak? Try asking, well, what has been draining my capacity? Instead of asking, why can't I move? Try asking, what would make the next step safer or more manageable? Do you notice the difference in these questions? The first set of questions keep you stuck, turning inwards on yourself and turning to yourself in judgment. The second set of questions actually opens a door and it gives you something to work with. This isn't just a nicer way of talking to yourself. It genuinely changes what you're able to see. So when you ask, what is wrong with me? Your brain goes looking for evidence of your flaws. And it's always going to find some because everyone has flaws, right? We all do. But when you ask, what have I been carrying? Your brain goes looking for context. It asks better questions. It starts connecting the dots between how you've been feeling and what you've actually been dealing with. And more often than not, when people do that honestly, the response isn't self-pity, it's relief. Because it turns out there was a reason. It wasn't nothing, and it was never nothing. This brings me to something I want to introduce today. Just one piece of it, not the whole picture, because we'll build on this in future episodes. It's part of what I call the victory framework. And the very first part of that framework is this. Before we can move forward, we must validate the valley. What does that even mean? It simply means acknowledging what has happened and recognizing its impact without judging ourselves for it. Friends, you need to be kinder to yourself. Let me be really clear about what validation is not. Validation does not mean giving up. It does not mean staying stuck. It does not mean excusing harmful behavior, and it does not mean believing nothing can change. What it does mean is far simpler and honestly far more powerful. It means being able to say, this has been difficult and it has affected me. That's it. That's the whole move. Not fixing it, not explaining it away, not rushing past it to get to the solution, just naming it honestly. And I know that might sound almost too simple to be useful, but we live in a culture that loves solutions, right? 5-step plans, quick fixes. So the idea of pausing to simply acknowledge something without immediately trying to solve it, it can feel almost unproductive. But I'd push back on that, and I will. Think about the last time you tried to fix a problem you hadn't actually admitted was a problem yet. It doesn't work, friend. You end up managing symptoms while the real thing sits there, untouched, underneath the surface. See, validation isn't a delay tactic. It's the foundation everything else gets built on. And here's why this matters so much. You cannot move honestly from a place you are still pretending you're not in. If you're telling yourself you're fine, I'm fine, when you're not fine, you can't actually take a real step forward because you're not standing on solid ground. You're standing on a story that to you isn't true. See, validating the valley is what gives you solid ground to stand on. It's not the end of the journey, but it is very often the beginning of your movement. So I don't want to leave you with just an idea today. I want to leave you with something to actually do. So here is a simple exercise. Maybe pause this after the episode, grab a notebook, grab your notes app on your phone, whatever works for you. And I want you to answer 3 questions honestly. And here they are. Question 1, what have I been carrying? Question 2, how has it been affecting me? And question 3, what do I need more of right now? Is it rest, support, clarity, space, or professional help? I want you to sit with those questions. Don't rush them. You might be surprised by what comes up when you actually give yourself permission to answer honestly. So instead of brushing past the question like we usually do, give yourself a moment to consider the questions. And then one more thing, one action beyond just the reflection. And this is important. Tell one safe person what you are actually carrying. Not everyone, not the whole world, just one person that you trust. Someone who you know who will listen without judging you. This connects to something I said back in episode 1, and it's worth repeating here. Information informs, but action transforms. Awareness matters. Understanding what's happening inside you matters. But awareness becomes powerful when it leads to one honest action. So answering those questions is awareness, and telling someone is the action. Don't stop at the first one. I know telling someone can feel harder than it sounds, and maybe you're worried about being a burden to someone, and maybe you've tried opening up before and it didn't go well. Maybe you genuinely don't know who that safe person is right now. Well, if that's you, start even smaller. It doesn't have to be a long conversation, it can be just one sentence. I've actually been finding things pretty heavy lately. You know what? That's enough. You're not looking for someone to fix it, you're just looking for the weight to be witnessed by someone other than you. Because carrying something alone in silence almost always makes it heavier than it needs to be. Friend, there may be nothing fundamentally wrong with you. You may simply have been carrying too much for too long without enough support. So this week, I want to invite you to stop asking. Stop asking the questions like, why can't I hope? And begin asking questions like, what have I been carrying and what support do I need? You don't need to solve everything today. You don't need your 5-year plan or your perfect answer. You just need to start by being honest about where you actually are, because validation is not the end of the journey, but it is often the beginning of movement. You're not broken. You are human. And from wherever you are today, you can begin to keep moving forward. And here's your reflection question for the week. What have I been carrying that I have never fully acknowledged? Sit with that. Write it down if you can. And if this episode meant something to you, I'd love you to share it with someone who might need to hear it too, because there's a good chance they're carrying more than they've let on as well. Next week, we're going to build on this, because understanding why you feel stuck is only half the story. The other half is learning how to actually start moving again, even before you feel ready. So that's episode 4, and I'm going to see you there. But until then, hey, like and subscribe, share this podcast with a loved one, someone that could gain great value from receiving this kind of input into their world. I want to encourage you listeners, you are not broken, you are human. So keep moving forward. You've been listening to the Valleys to Victory podcast with Jeremy Greening. For practical tools, encouragement, and support to help you move from your valley to your victory, visit www.valleystovictory.com. And remember, you don't have to stay stuck. Keep moving forward.